Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Savvy Ladies Wednesday Wisdom webinar. I'm Maggie Montemuro, and I'm the Marketing Manager at Savvy Ladies. This is a quick reminder that if you have any questions during the webinar, you can type them into the chat box or email info@savvyladies.org. Today's presenter is Anthony Davenport, founder and president of Regal Financial, a credit management firm which provides professional services to clients that include professional athletes and team owners, as well as award-winning entertainers and performers. Anthony's experience makes him uniquely qualified to teach credit education and identity theft protection, and he teaches continuing education courses for the New York State Society of CPAs, New York County Bar Association, and New York Real Estate Institute on consumer credit issues. Anthony has advanced certification from both FICO and the Consumer Data Industry Association, and he has been featured in Forbes and Yahoo Finance. Thank you for being with us today, Anthony, and I'll hand it over to you.
Thank you so very much. It's an honor to speak with you. So I entitled this presentation, Why Everyone is as Famous as a Kardashian for a Reason. I'm not necessarily a fan of the show. I don't even know what they do for a living, but the reality is, if back when I was growing up, if you wanted to know something about someone, especially celebrities, you basically had to watch Entertainment Tonight. And what's funny is I was talking to John Tesh's business manager the other day about this, and I was like, that's the show that you had to watch if you wanted to know what was going on in celebrities. And other than that hour-long show, you didn't know what was going on in the lives of celebrities. Maybe you could read People magazine, but on a daily basis, that was it. But now, everyone is pretty much as famous as someone that would have been on Entertainment Tonight is. And the proliferation of the web has made us so out there and so exposed. It's just part of the universe. I mean, this is being carried out on the web. And we now transact and live our lives through the web and social media. We do everything online. And what most people aren't thinking about is the fact that now that we do everything online, that information stays there forever. It's not something that just goes away or you can delete it. It's if you put something online, you no longer have control over it, and that includes your payment, your identity, your personal information. All of that is something that is exposed, so you need to be aware. And we're going to get into some of the common misconceptions about this and actually what you can do about it. All right, so we're going to discuss who's at risk. There are people that are definitely more at risk than others. We're going to talk about the various types of identity theft, and then tips on how you can avoid them. We're going to talk about how ID theft happens. This is a big section, and it's one that most people don't realize how they're making themselves vulnerable. And we have a special presentation that's separate than this, talking about how your kids are making you more vulnerable, and they may not even realize it. A fun thing that I love is, and I get a kick out of it, is showing people how much their personal information is being sold for on the black market, which is a lot less than you think. And for those people that it's too late, you've already had this happen to you, I'm going to show you some steps to recover from identity theft as quickly as possible. And then the last bit, we'll just be talking about what's on the horizon, the future of identity theft. What are the changing trends? What you're going to see coming out that's going to make you more vulnerable, so you can be cognizant of it and make the right decisions. So who's at risk? And this is the scary part. If you're, I guarantee at the end of this hour, you're going to leave thinking, I'm so scared. I don't want to transact online. I don't want to do anything online. I just want to go hide in a corner. But that's not really what I want you to do. But in 2014, half of all American adults had their informations exposed through a large-scale identity breach. Half of all Americans. And 2015 actually had more breaches and was even worse. So by the end of this year, I expect that, I mean, the number is really going to be almost every single person here on Earth over the age of 18 in America will have had their information exposed through one of the major large breaches. And that's changing the face of identity theft so that you can be aware of it. But also, the people that are especially at risk, anyone that's considered the 1%. So if you have a net worth greater than $250,000, the bullseye on your back grew immensely. We find that people that are considered high profile, people like Wikipedia page or people on TV or anything like that, in addition to people that make over $250,000 a year, account for 43% of all identity theft, meaning they have your info and then they utilize it. So the thieves are going after the people who have the money and who the information can be obtained easily. That's the simple way of putting it. Another thing to point out is that if you are going to have your information stolen, most people think of identity theft as, someone getting a hold of your credit card or debit card and going shopping. But in reality, 2/3 of the time that they get a hold of your info, what they are doing is they are taking your information and they're opening up a new line of credit in your name. And a real quick reason behind that is that if I were to grab your card right now and start using it, and let's say I go shop at, the Men's Warehouse, uh, they're going to track that and the banks will flag it as something that's an unusual purchase. They know your spending habits, they know your algorithms, they know where you go, where you spend money, how you do it, and where you spend it. So if you do most of your purchases in the New York metropolitan area and then you travel to, let's say, Kentucky, they may flag that. And the banks are very, very good about understanding the habits of their people. And I'm sure many of you have witnessed when a bank will call you or text you or ask you online, did you make this purchase? And that's why they're keeping track of it. So the thieves have figured out it's a very short shopping spree if they get a hold of your credit card or debit card. So what they're doing instead is they're opening up new lines of credit that don't have a history behind them. And that will allow them to make purchases, but then not have the banks say, oh, this is outside of your usual buying algorithm because there's no history for it. So you have to be cognizant that if you have this information stolen, be aware that they may do something worse. They may in fact, have more mischievous plans for you. And one tip that we have is that you should check your credit on a regular basis, at least once a year, to ensure that no one has utilized your information, because 20% of people don't find out for 4 years or more that they've been a victim of identity theft. And can you imagine that if someone were to, take your wallet and then you go to the police and say, help me, my wallet's been stolen, and they say, when did this happen? Oh, about 4 years ago. They're not going to do anything for you. And if your identity's been stolen, it's the same principles behind it. You can go to the creditors and the banks and institutions and say, I just discovered this now that I was robbed 4 years ago, and they're not going to do anything to help you. So be aware of it, pull your report, and then you'll know if this has happened to you. Especially look at the inquiries section of a credit report, which is where anyone that would have applied for credit will show up. And if you don't recognize them, you should contact that institution and say, help me, I don't recognize this, who are you? And if you open up a new line of credit, I need you to close it. Another tip is that ATM fraud is going through the roof. And that's where people are putting what they are called skimmers on top of an ATM machine. They attach little cameras. They also will attach a little device that's super thin. It's like paper thin that will attach on top of an ATM machine. And as you enter in your card and you type in your PIN code, they keep track of all of that. And that's been skyrocketing. It's increased about 600% in the last year alone. So, and part of that reason is because the technology is getting so complex. They're able to make these things so incredibly thin that you may not notice it, and it hits a lot of people. So a tip that we learned from an NYPD detective is that when you're going into a questionable area, and this could be anywhere really, even Midtown Manhattan, if you see something that doesn't look like it's quite attached permanently, you may want to wiggle it, because all they're doing is usually just slapping these things on with a little bit of tape or Velcro or something like that so that they can quickly grab it. They can just slap it on and then yank it off. So you may want to jiggle it and see if something is a little bit loose, because that is a sign that that ATM has been tampered with. And just be cognizant that if you see an ATM that looks a little bit off, do a little bit of wiggle and you'll see whether it has a skimmer on there, because it's so easy to do. And they do that in Midtown Manhattan all the time because there's so much traffic that they could put something above the either the ATM itself or the door to get in the ATM. They leave it there for 30 minutes and they probably have 100 people's info on it. So it's really easy to do. So next part is all the different types of identity theft. So new account fraud is, as I mentioned, the biggest and the one that's the biggest concern, where they're opening up a new account in your name and then making charges on it. That accounts for 66% of all of this type of fraud. The other is account takeover fraud, and that used to just mean if they were going to take over your bank accounts or your assets and then drain them. But now it's also stretching into social media accounts. So people are going after attractive Twitter handles and Facebook accounts and things like that, and using that to steal people's identities and then do other things with it. Sometimes it's a very useful Twitter handle, and they will sell that for money to someone else after they've taken over from you. There's also criminal identity theft, which is similar to the movie Identity Thief. I don't know if any of you saw that. It's a hilarious movie. And usually Hollywood always embellishes what could really happen in real life. But in that instance, I've heard and seen and experienced every single one of those things that happen in the movie. But that's where someone will commit a crime essentially in your name, and then when they're arrested, they hand over an ID that says, "This is me, this is where to find me, and it's your information." And people will have warrants in their name as a result of this. So the next thing is medical identity theft. And this is a growing concern because of how easy it is to do this. But essentially, the insurance industry is absolutely terrible. They're god awful at their billing, at their practice, at everything around them. And the thieves know this. So what they're doing is they're getting a hold of your information, and then they're filing fraudulent claims against your insurance company for different surgeries and medical practices and other things like that that you've never had. But if they know your medical history, they can see what you're likely to need or that would make sense to an insurance company. So, if you have an issue with your knees, for example, they will say, okay, well, this person, I've got a hold of their info. I'm going to file a false claim for knee surgery to this fraudulent doctor who sends a bill out for Dr. Dewey, Cheatham, and Howe or something like that. And then when they pay the claim, the issue is that you're not notified necessarily. You may receive an explanation of benefits, but they could also send that to another address. And I think you have to be a rocket scientist to understand an explanation of benefits anyhow, about what the charge is from and who's owed and how much and all that stuff. And you may not find out. So it's a serious issue. And unfortunately, I don't have any tips on that. I haven't heard of any monitoring that will tell people that someone is making claims against your insurance company, and it could affect your likelihood of getting approved for claims later on down the road. But just something to be on your radar about. There's also business or commercial identity theft. Small business owners are a big portion of the people that have their identities stolen, in part because you're so busy running your business that you don't frequently think about, managing all the other aspects of your life and paying attention. And your business accounts frequently have more money flow through them than a personal account would. So that's a growing area that thieves are going after businesses more than anything else, small ones, because they know that you're not going to have the security measures as well. And the last one is identity cloning, which is a lot of fun. because that is like the James Bond, I'm going to change your face. I'm going to give you a new passport, new social security card, a new identity, and all of that. And they could impersonate you through those methods. And you could do that as a thief for as little as $1,300. You can get a full kit on someone just like James Bond did. Not that I'm encouraging it, but you can do it for pretty cheap. So, how ID theft happens, this could be its own hour-long discussion in itself, but I've listed out a couple different ways. One that an NYPD detective told me about that I get a big kick out of is that crackheads have learned to dumpster dive. They will go in, behind a corporation or behind a bank, get your information, and then they will piece it together. And, they've been able to figure out how to put together shred materials. They've got time, and then learn how to impersonate you, go into a bank, drain your account, do that sort of stuff. So, but the one that's more common is what's called email phishing. This has really grown in popularity um, because it's simpler to do. Most people think of email phishing as, a Saudi Arabian prince wants to cash this $1 million check, but they just need your help in doing it, and they'll give you a cut. But it's really become a significantly more complex than that. They now, what they will do is they will go and painstakingly recreate a website that you're familiar with. So I've seen them cloned on Chase, for example, where they will go to Chase's website and down to the advertisements, copy it pixel by pixel, put it together to look exactly like the Chase website. Then they'll craft an email that will go out and say like, "Hi, Chase needs to verify your information for a charge," or see if we're looking to confirm your identity. We're concerned about identity thieves. I've actually seen that in an email. And what they will do is they will say, "Click here." You click on that link and it will take you to a page that looks exactly like Chase. But the key is that it may be like one digit off. So instead of chase.com, it may be chasess.com, or they may have chase.com.ru for Russia. That's a very common thing. It may be one slight thing off that you may not notice. And the risk is that anything you enter in is entering into a fraudulent site. So they often want you to log in, enter your username and your password, and then boom, they have all of your info. So one tip that we have relating to that is if you ever get an email from anyone that you do business with or don't do business with, and they say, "Click here to go on this URL," you can right click on the link, see what URL they're really sending you to. Or the best practice is that if you know this institution, you probably know their website. Open up a new browser, type in that URL in that website or in that browser, and start from there. Or call the number on the back of your card and say, "I got this email. Is this legitimate? Do you really need me to do something?" Do not click on a link that you receive, because it could take you to who knows where, and maybe it'll look like the real deal, but not really be the real deal. And we've seen so many people hit by this that it's really an epidemic, and you're just likely to get caught up in that. So that's it. Another issue that's growing is that these thieves don't have to be super sophisticated hackers these days. They can break into, Chase, for example, was hacked. They got 76 million records. But one thing that is a lot easier to hack is your email address. And earlier this week, it was announced that many, many, many millions of email addresses were hacked from Gmail and Yahoo by a Russian crime ring. And people didn't really make a big deal out of it. They're like, it's Gmail, it's Yahoo, whatever. But a real concern is that if someone gets a hold of your email address, and you have to really think about this, think of all the different things that you've already sent from your email. So you've sent out probably your driver's license, maybe your social security card, maybe your tax returns, but then also think of who emails you. So often, if you have a relationship with a financial institution, they will email you statements on a regular basis. And for the vast majority of these, your username is something that's been emailed to you previously, or it is something that is your email address, is your username in many cases. So, and this is the scary part, but if you have lost your password and you go onto these sites, how do you reset it? You click the reset button if you know the username, and then they will email it to you. So if that person has your email, they don't have to figure out how to hack Chase or Fidelity or Morgan Stanley or any one of those institutions. They just have to hack your email, which has low security. People don't think of really securing their email. And then they have access to a lot of your data. And we've seen instances where people have had their emails hacked. The people will figure out their username and passwords for their financial institutions. They can drain your or your bank accounts, and then the banks will say you didn't protect your password well enough because they didn't hack us. What they did is they got a hold of your username and password. You weren't secure enough with it. We're not liable. We're washing our hands of it. Especially if it's a large sum of money, they don't want to eat that. Their insurance companies won't help them out. So there's a fairly simple process that you can make or you can employ that will almost virtually eliminate the possibility of your email getting hacked. And it's called two-step verification. Two-step verification means that in order to log into your email, you have to have your cell phone handy for each computer or device that you're going to allow access to. And Gmail does this very easily. So that the first time you log into a new computer or device, it will send you a text saying, is this really you? And do you really want to authorize this computer or device? And it will make you do that again every 30 days. It's something that we make mandatory for all of our employees, that their company work email must have two-step verification, and it eliminates the ability for someone to hack our email and access all the data that is in there. And it's a little bit of a headache because you have to do that every 30 days. You have to have your cell phone handy, but everyone carries their cell phone everywhere. So it's not that big of a headache, and it's something that will help you avoid a real disaster. But also, other than that, I mean, people think of like the cleaning lady breaking into their place and stealing their info. That's really not happening a whole lot. But it is something that definitely happens. And if you're high profile, if you're someone that has like a Wikipedia page or someone that there's a lot of information about you out there on the web, if you've had lawsuits filed against you or for you, there's a lot of information out there about you, and thieves can skim that just using Google and Wikipedia to discover everything they would need to answer security questions about you. So some of the huge hacks that are out there involve Gmail, and this is actually from last year. 5 million accounts were compromised. Ashley Madison had 37 million hacked, and just the other day there was another dating site that had 30 million users where they had their information compromised. Chase, as I mentioned, had 76 million customers, anyone from 2000 to 2015. And the real danger is that we're getting to be a bit desensitized to this because we just hear about it every day. An institution's breached, this institution's breached. They show that the vast majority of people aren't concerned about a breach that happens with an institution they do business with. They're not going to end the relationship as a result. So we've been hearing from a lot of people that they're concerned about whether or not they've been a victim of one of these breaches. Maybe they've got a notice in the mail, which 25% of adults received last year, a letter that said, we lost your information and a thief has it. Just last year alone, 25%. But we helped create a site, just a web page. It doesn't collect your data or your info, and it will allow you to very quickly and easily see in under 2 minutes if you've been a victim of one of these large-scale breaches, and also what they took from you. So we could say, okay, Chase, they got a hold of your name, your address, your social, your date of birth, your checking account number, your routing number, your account balance, all these different things. You'll be able to see it, it'll light up and say, these are the things that they took from you. And then we'll offer some tips on if this information was stolen, this is what you need to do about it. So that's something that we created, and I think the URL is in here, right here. So it's the URL is there, and we'll send that as a follow-up email if we're permitted to do so that you can see that. And we call it a personal risk assessment. Under 2 minutes, you'll be able to know who has your info and whether they lost it or not, and then what you should do about it. So, a little tip and a trick to help you determine whether you should be scared or not. So here I have a picture from the movie Identity Thief, which I love. Highly encourage you watching it. It won't make you scared, I promise. But really, the reason why these breaches are so common, and the reason why you can expect that they will increase in number and scope and frequency, is because think of all the institutions that have your information. You could be as guarded as you want with your info. You can say, I'm not going to give it to this person or that person, but think of all the people that already have it. How many times have you given your social security number out in your adult life? If any one of those places were breached, past employers, current employers, banking institutions, financial institutions, insurance companies, all these places that you've given your social security number out to, if they are breached, you're done. It only takes one. So you really can't stop that from happening. You can't, ensure that a company is really going to protect your data. But what you can do is limit the amount of people that you give it out to. And a tip on how to avoid this with a place that really doesn't need it and is sloppy and terrible with it is a doctor's office. Think about it, every time you go into a doctor's office or a hospital or ER, they always want your social security number. Most people don't think about why they want it. The only reason why they want it is not to necessarily identify you, and they don't enter everything in your medical records according to your social security number. Excuse me. But what they're doing is they're using that info to then collect on you and sell the bill to a collection agency if you default on the payment. So if the insurance company disagrees with the amount that is owed, they will then sell that information to a third-party debt collector who now has your social security number to track you. So I would advise, don't give that to them. Another group are landlords. If you're looking to rent an apartment, they often want to run a credit check on you. You don't need to give that to them. What I advise people to do is to run your own report, black out the social security number, but still leave your name, and then send that to them and say, take a look at this. You can see my credit history. You can see my credit scores. I'm a solid individual. You can rent to me. You don't need my social security number, because who knows how safe they're going to be with it and how reputable they are. Management companies are full of people, and people can steal from you. So I don't see a real good reason to give them a social security number, because they don't necessarily practice safe habits with it. So be cognizant of who you give it to and how do they really, really need it. I often just tell people, no, I'm not going to give it to you. And then I see if they really make a good claim as to why they need to collect that information. So as promised, here's some numbers to scare you. But there is what's called a dark web. And the dark web is essentially a place where all of your information can be sold, and sold for very cheap. And this is what I'm talking about when I say this is really lowering the barrier of entry for thieves. When you think of an identity thief, you probably think of like a total computer nerd that's disgruntled, sits there in a dark room in a basement with their headphones on. But really, there's only not that many super nerds like that out there that are looking to hack your info. What there are is now these nerds will hack a system or institution, and they can't possibly use all the information themselves. So they will then sell that information on these websites where thieves can peruse it as simply as like eBay or Amazon, where they can just say, well, I'm looking for a credit card today. I'd like to get a credit card, and I want one that has a nice limit and that I can make some good charges on. So they can see all the different range of credit cards that are for sale, and they could do that for as little as $1. They can get your credit card or debit card for $1. It increases in price if it has a higher limit or if it's a debit card, if it's tied to an account that has an average balance higher than normal. So it's super cheap. Social Security number is only a few bucks. It's really silly easy to get. They charge a few bucks for that. But you'll see further down the road or down the line, health insurance credentials are about 20 bucks. That's one of the actually more expensive types of items for sale. And as I mentioned, it's because medical identity theft is growing. And if they have access to your info, they can bill for many thousands of dollars. So the theft is usually much larger on those accounts than it is on a credit or debit card because the banks will figure out it's not you and shut it off pretty quickly. But with this, you're not likely to find out. So they will get big bucks for that. And what they call a full identity kits with a Z is literally everything that could impersonate you. The full James Bond treatment is about 12 to 1300 bucks. So it's not a lot of money to completely take you to the cleaners, impersonate you, and and do some James Bond spy type stuff, or like The Americans, which is one of my new favorite shows out there, where people are impersonating other people. It's not that hard to do, and it's not that expensive. So some tips on how to keep your information out of additional hands and also receive less junk mail. I'm sure everyone here gets a whole bunch of junk mail saying you've been pre-approved for this offer or this credit card or this car loan. Or if after you move, you'll see like, here's a Home Depot offer, here's a Lowe's offer, fix up your new place. And you may wonder, how did they know that I moved? So what is happening is the credit bureaus are collecting data and information on you. And then they want to sell that information. That's really how they make their money. But you can opt out of that because you never really opted into the credit bureau selling your data. And the way to do that is you go to a website, optoutprescreen.com. If you do that, you can, under 2 minutes, tell them, please do not sell my data. I don't wish it to be sold. You can do it online and it will last a few years, or you can print out and mail a form that makes it longer lasting for years. Instead of just a few years, it could be 5 to 7 years, but you still have to do that every once in a while so that you receive less junk mail and less data being sold. Because we've discovered that the credit bureaus themselves don't have the most stringent requirements for keeping your identity safe. And if someone goes to them and says, I'm willing to pay money for these records, they will give it to them. And we found that even one credit bureau was selling data to a crime syndicate directly because the crime syndicate was paying them out of Vietnam on a regular basis. And they said, here's all the records. You got them. To the tune of 15 million people were exposed to one group because they just simply paid for the records. So I recommend telling the credit bureaus, I don't want you to have my info being sold out there. Optoutprescreen.com. Another one that you can do, and this is to get fewer calls, is donotcall.gov. That says do not call and try to solicit information from me. Key is they now have extended that to cell phones. So you need to register every phone number that you possibly have. Home phone, cell phone, anything like that. You need to register that number and it'll tell you whether they've already included you in that database or whether you should do it again. And it takes like 10 seconds and it helps keep your information out of additional hands. So the value of an email address, as I mentioned, is pretty high. Thieves are generally paying just under 30 bucks for your email address. It's easy to hack. And the reason, as I mentioned, is because they get a hold of your info. They have a hold of a lot of things in your life. Most people use the same email address and password across a wide variety of sites because we don't want to remember 18 significant different logons. I think everyone has more than that. So one tip that we have come up with that can help you out with this is to set up the two-step verification like I mentioned, but also use what's called a password manager. This is like LastPass is an example of this. This is a company that will keep in a vault all of your username and passwords to all the accounts that you have a relationship with. And then it can go in and you only have one email or one login, one username, one password to get into LastPass. And then you can tell them, I want you to generate new passwords for all of my accounts, ones that won't be easily guessed, ones that are very complex. They have uppercase, lowercase, special letters, something that will mean nothing to a hacker, and they're less likely to find out. And you don't have to remember it because all you have to do is remember your LastPass info, username and password, and then you can use that to log into those sites. So that's a very secure way of keeping your email information safe. So they're called password managers, and there's more than LastPass, but that's the one that I use, and my wife loves it because now she doesn't have to text me and say, "What's the username for our cable? What's our cell phone one? I don't remember." It's all kept in one place for all of our accounts. So now that I've scared you and told you all the different ways that this stuff can happen, I really want to educate you on some of the options that are in existence to help you avoid this stuff from happening at all. And I'm going to tell you the pros and cons of these because they're important to understand. And there's a lot of misconceptions out there about what it does. And the first one is credit monitoring. So credit monitoring is absolutely wonderful for nothing. It does nothing. It really only is designed to tell you about theft after it happens, typically a day or two, sometimes three. It'll say someone took your information and used it, and it doesn't prevent it. I don't care what commercial you've seen, LifeLock is the best at marketing and advertising, and they even have a cute one that says, "Oh, we do more than just monitor, we do other stuff." All those things are bells and whistles, and they are meant to just sound really cool, but they don't actually stop someone from using your information. They're only going to tell you about it afterwards, which is not the best way of approaching it. So be aware that that's their limitation, is that they say, "Oh, we monitor known thief chat rooms and see if they're selling your data," but that's all garbage. It's bells and whistles. It's useless. Doesn't do any good by itself. Uh, the next thing is a fraud alert. And I'm sure that some of you have gone through this process before where you go to one bureau, and this is the convenient part of it. You go to one bureau and you put a fraud alert on, and they will automatically notify the other two bureaus and say, "This person may have suffered some fraud. We need you to be aware of this." And they ask that you are called if if an application has been made so that they can verify your identity. But the issue is that uh, it's just a digital note added to your credit report that says, "I may have been a victim of fraud and I would like you to call me." But think of the last time you were in front of someone sitting down and you applied for credit right then and there, and then they read your credit report in front of you and then said, "Oh, fraud alert. Is this really you? I need to verify that it's you." It doesn't happen anymore. Almost everything is done through an online application by a computer that makes a decision as to whether or not to give you a line of credit or a loan or whatever. So the issue is that a computer is not going to read your credit report and say, "Hold on, I need to call this person." And the computer can't make a call anyhow. So it's only in limited institutions that it's going to work where they have those processes set up. And it can be a pain to kind of remove if you put it on and you don't really need it anymore. So I don't advise just doing a fraud alert because it's not going to catch everything. It's only going to catch some things, and it can be a bit of a headache. The next one is a security freeze. A security freeze is where you're taking an additional step. You're saying, "I do not want someone to even be able to pull my credit report. I don't care if they have my name, my address, my social, my date of birth. Do not give them access to my credit report." And now that is simply the best thing you can possibly do to protect your identity. Because even if they already know all of your info, they can't use it to open up new lines of credit, which, as I mentioned, is what happens 2/3 of the time they have your info. The downside to it is that you have to do it with each credit bureau. each time you want to either place the block or freeze, or each time you want to lift it. And they each have their own separate processes. Some you can do on the web, some you can do over the phone, some you have to do in writing. It's roughly a 23-step process to go through and ensure that your credit is frozen with all three bureaus. And a lot of people get really frustrated with it, but we strongly advise this for people, especially if they had a contentious divorce where your spouse would know your information and they could use that against you and apply for lines of credit. I hear that all the time because they figure you're not going to get them arrested and thrown in jail. So you want to place that security freeze because it's the safest thing you can do. Just be cognizant of how you're placing the freeze, and that every time you want to use your credit, you're going to have to think in advance, usually a couple days out, and say, all right, I need to go through this process. Keep the PIN codes, if you're issued PIN codes, in a safe place, like a safe. Don't keep it stored on your computer or anything like that, or written down where someone can see it, because then you're just ruining the steps that you've taken to protect yourself. But that's definitely the best way to do it. 23 steps, each bureau. It's going to take a while, but it's the best thing that you can possibly do. And the reason why they make it so complex is because the credit bureaus and creditors want to have easy access to your info. If they were to make it easy to put a block on your credit, then fewer people can pull your credit, simply put. And if fewer people are pulling your credit, the credit bureaus are making less money. And they also realize that a lot of this credit is obtained through department store cards. And department stores want you to use your credit. They want you to sit in line and say, I really like these chinos and I can get 10% off them if I apply today. So they want you to have access to it, and they've made it difficult to do this, but they had to make it a right as of a few years ago for people to have this option. The other thing, as I mentioned, that you can do is remove yourself from pre-screen credit offers. That is the optoutprescreen.com, and then also the donotcall.gov. Very useful tips that'll only take a little bit of time, but what it does is it reduces the mail that is sent to you, where you may get those offers that say, you've been pre-approved for this credit card, just call in and we'll give it to you. If a thief gets a hold of that in your mail, they could call the number and say, yeah, and I want you to send the card to this address instead. They don't verify much. They're just so happy you called, and that person will run up charges against you and you won't even know. So those are the current methods of assessing or utilizing the credit protection methods out there. So now one of the reasons why you're hearing about this so much is not only because everything is being digitized, everything is being done online and kind of waved in the air through our cell phones and Wi-Fi and whatever. We're just literally sending this info through the mail or through the air. But also a dangerous thing that people are doing is they're using things like Apple Pay. They're using Android Pay, where you're literally taking your cell phone and you're just waving it in the air and beaming information to anyone within, firing distance of that thing, which could be like 10 to 15 feet. People could literally sit by your register and just wait for you to zap your info, and you're essentially opening your phone and everything on it to this thief. So to that aim, we find that just your standard credit card transaction, 0.6% of those are fraudulent. 0.6%. But on Apple Pay, 6% of all transactions, or 10 times the number, are fraudulent. That's a huge number. It's so much greater because you're literally opening up your data and just kind of waving it around. So be cognizant that if you're going to use something like that, you're greatly increasing your chances of having someone steal your info. So as the criminals are changing, again, don't think of the nerd sitting in his mom's basement with his headphones on, playing video games and hacking you. Think of it as there's a few of those. They get access to tons of data. They were able to track down the individuals that hacked Chase and a couple other institutions, getting access to 100 million records overall, more than. And as a group of 4 people, not a huge number of people, right? So then they're selling the data online, so that anyone that understands how to type in a URL and double click can now be a thief. And to demonstrate this point, we've done research to show that street crime itself, muggings, robberies, burglaries, things like that, is decreasing significantly at the same time that the increase in identity theft online is increasing. And the reason for that is because if someone were to, walk up and down Park Avenue here and grab your purse and run away, you're going to be able to shut down those cards pretty quickly. Plus, there's a lot of cameras around that may identify that person, and if they get caught, they're going to go to jail for a long, long time. And they've discovered a trend with gangs, for example. There's a lot of gangs out there that used to sell drugs, but that's a very risky endeavor. They'd have to stand on a particular street corner, identify themselves or make themselves easily identifiable as a drug dealer. They're basically holding their hands up in the air for the cops to roll by and say, I have drugs on me, get me right now. And there's also the risk of rival gangs shooting them, and dying for what they find is really only a few bucks an hour that the low-level street guys are making. It's not quite like New Jack City where, the Nino Brown on the very top makes all the money. But in reality, there is a person that makes all the money, and then the people down below make significantly less. And the thieves have figured that out, that the risk of being killed or going to jail is very high. If they get caught and they go to jail, they're going to go to not a very nice prison, and they're going to go for a very long time. But on the other hand, identity theft is viewed as a white-collar crime. So what that means is that if they are caught, which they find that the odds are less than 1 in 1,000 thieves are caught. They almost never catch these guys. But if they're caught, they go to jail for significantly less time. They generally go for about 4 to 5 years, and they're going to a prison that's, they're not going to Rikers. They're going to what they call camps in many cases, where they're, playing basketball, they're doing yoga, they may be doing tennis, and they are, learning financial tips from like Bernie Madoff's crew. I mean, it's a huge difference between what happens. They're significantly less likely to get caught, and if they do, they go for much less time in a much nicer environment. What would you choose? You would choose to do this identity theft. So that's what they're really moving to. And to demonstrate that point, the NYPD detective that I work a lot with, she said that they went to arrest an identity thief that they had figured out. And they're like, we caught one. We're so excited. They went to arrest him. They were seizing the computers and they were searching the house to see what else they could find. And they were like, this guy's going to go to jail for like 4 or 5 years, and we're going to show that we got one. They get up to the attic. The attic is filled with pot. And I'm not talking the potted plants. I'm talking about pot. So then they said this changes everything. Now he's going to go to jail for 20 years in a place like Rikers. Forget the identity theft prison camp where he's going to play and work on his tennis game. He's going to go to a very, very, very bad prison. So the thieves are figuring out this is more profitable, less likely to get caught. And if you do, you go to a nicer place. The choice is really, really simple for them. And that's something you need to be cognizant of. A final aspect of that is tax fraud is increasing immensely. And I always believe that if you want to know what's going on, with the street gangs and the criminals and whatnot, listen to the rap lyrics of these guys that are literally on the streets. And there was a rap group that came out with a song about 2 years ago, and it's called Drop Hose. Literally, it's called Drop Hose. And what it means is this rapper is lamenting the fact that he doesn't have enough people that are willing to have fraudulently filed tax returns sent to their address so that they can then, pick up prepaid cards or preloaded cards with the tax refunds. They can just swoop through. They need an address where they can send all these things to. So the guy's going, oh my God, I got so many fraudulent tax returns to file, but I don't have enough hoes to pick them up for me. So then I can go and pick up the cards and give them a cut. So that's where crime is really moving to, is where criminals and thugs are now uh, better at your average CPA at understanding a tax return and all the different schedules and whatnot. Um, and you have to be cognizant that that's something that's going to increase because the IRS is not very good at protecting your information. In fact, they're not very good at anything, but they're especially not good at protecting your information. So you're going to see a lot more tax fraud happen. And to that aim, excuse me, we included a slide that lists out what to do if your tax return's been fraudulently filed. Because what most people think about is, how do I file my tax return now? But what they should be thinking about is all the information that's on a tax return: your name, your address, your social, your date of birth, some of your income sources, maybe your employment, and all of that for anyone that you file jointly with, your spouses, your children. All of that information's out there. So what you need to do is, if you find and you get a letter in the mail saying your tax return was fraudulently filed, or your accountant notifies you, what you should do is also pull a credit report and then see if there's any inquiries on there that you don't recognize. See if they've used your information to apply for credit, because that's frequently the next step. After they got a hold of your info, they're now going to use it for other things beyond your tax return, because it's a treasure trove of info. You should also request to get an IP pin, or they call it, just call it a pin, that says I need to have this pin when I will file my tax return. But it's not the safest thing in the world, because the thieves are even hacking that. But you're creating an additional barrier for them that they may decide to skip over you and go to someone who's a lot easier to get to. So be aware that tax return fraud usually means other fraud is coming down the road. And you should also get a security freeze with each of the 3 credit bureaus to make sure that doesn't get worse for you. Last part, this is the fun part, the future of ID theft. Now, keep in mind that everything you know is basically getting online. Pretty soon, your toaster is going to be online, and you're going to be able to make toast from your cell phone. But also, your cars are going to be connected to the internet. And they already have shown examples of this, where people will be in a car, in the next lane to you, and they can hack your car and slow down the brakes, speed it up, turn. They could make it crash if they wanted to. But anything that's connected online is now essentially controllable. And our cars are really computers these days. There's also your thumbprint is now being used as a method of identifying you. But you got to remember that you don't get another, just like you don't get another social security number, you don't get another thumbprint. So if your thief gets a hold of that info, they're able to do a whole lot with it, because you can't ever change it. And another thing that's happening is the Internet of Things, meaning they're connecting everything online so that your house will have all these interconnected devices. An example of that is Amazon created what's called a dash button. So you could take one of these really, really small little things, put it on the side of like a washing machine. And as you're running low on laundry detergent, you could just tap that button one time, and they will ship you out, your laundry detergent quickly. Just charge your account, boom, make it as easy as possible for you to spend money. And eventually credit cards are going to go away. So be aware that all of these things that are making life easier are also going to make it easier for identity thieves to get a hold of your info. And one final tip is that if you think that you may have had your information compromised, or you want to check your email address, you can go to this site here at the bottom, Have I Been Pwned, but they spelled pwned, PWNED.com. And you could search and find out if your information, or if your email address has been compromised as one of these breaches. If so, you should change your password. You may want to use a 2-step verification system, and then change your passwords everywhere and use like a password manager. So thank you guys very much for attending. I don't know if we have time for questions. Maggie, I'll leave that to you.
Thank you, Anthony. Yes, we had some questions come in already, so I'll read you the first one here.
Okay.
It's, how much does it typically cost to clean up a person's credit once they have been a victim of identity theft?
Yeah, that's actually one of the reasons I created this service of protecting credit, is because people didn't want to pay my bill to clean up credit. It's a minimum of $3.95 to enroll, and then $150 per month that it takes to clean things up. Generally, identity theft takes about 6 months. So that's a total of, about $1,000 or so to clean things up if you didn't prevent it from happening in the first place. If you do it on your own, we find that the average amount of time it takes is about 40 hours to clean up things, and that has to be done during 9 to 5 hours. So it's going to really interfere with your life. But that's the reason why we charge a lot for it, because it takes a lot of time to clean up.
Okay, thank you.
Mm-hmm.
And another question we have is, what do you think about those phone apps that track your spending? Are there risks with those?
That's a good question. I got that one last night at Morgan Stanley too. So um, I think that they can be useful in terms of making you aware of how you're spending your money. There's places like Mint, there's Credit Sesame, Credit Karma. But the one thing to really be cognizant is that you're essentially telling them, you can have my data and information and sell it to people. So you have to be comfortable with all the information you're providing to them and know that they're going to sell that data and then try to sell you more stuff. And even if you've opted out of pre-screen offers, they still will be able to sell you stuff because you've given them permission.
Okay, thanks. And next question we got is, if I remove myself from a credit bureau, will that affect my credit score?
I'm assuming that you mean if you do like a security freeze or opt out pre-screen or something like that. That doesn't remove you from the credit bureaus. Um, Ironically, there really isn't a way to remove yourself from the credit bureaus. Even though you never gave them permission to collect data on you, it's really difficult to get removed. I've seen people removed that are very, very high profile, but that's the credit bureau's decision. So doing an opt-out pre-screen or doing a security freeze doesn't impact your credit scores or your credit profile in any way. Everything's still there and moving. It's just invisible to a thief.
Okay. And I wanted to share a comment we have here. I thought it was helpful. Someone wrote to us that she was the victim of identity theft, and that not letting people know her birth date was the primary way that she got out of having to pay the bills, because the thief didn't know her correct birth date, since she doesn't post it on Facebook or any other website. I didn't know if you had any follow-up information about that.
Yeah, that's really a smart thing, and I see that a lot of people on Facebook are moving to take down their hometown, their mother's maiden name, things that a thief could use to identify them, because they're going on Facebook and they're figuring out everything. Real quick point on that: I went to a middle school with 10-year-olds, and I essentially taught them to hack a celebrity. It took them 21 minutes to find their name, address, social, date of birth, mother's maiden name, high school mascot, previous employers. All these different things just by using Google, Wikipedia, and especially social media. You can find out anything you want to know to answer security questions just through social media. So you have to be careful about what you put on there and just be cognizant that once you put it out there, you no longer own it.
All right, very helpful. I think we're about out of time, so I want to thank you, Anthony, for an excellent presentation. I want to thank everyone who joined us today and asked questions. We hope that you'll join us again. Thank you so much for all of your helpful tips and a great presentation, Anthony.
My pleasure. If you have any further tips that you want to do, any further reading, you can go to mycreditblock.com, and we have a blog there that gets into like all the different things you can do to protect yourself or recover from theft after it happens. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Have a great day.
All right, you too.
Bye-bye.